welcome back. So in this video we're going to start the enemy creation process. So how our enemies are going to work is very simple. Basically we're going to have a main general enemy script that will be attached to every single one of our enemies. This script here will contain the functionalities that all enemies will have. So things like the ability to take damage or speed will go inside of this script because all enemies will need to have the ability to take damage and the ability to have a speed variable. So anything common between all enemies will go inside of this script. Then we'll be creating specific enemy scripts, so for example the melee enemy script, that will only contain the functionalities that the melee enemy will have. And after these specific enemy scripts will derive from the general enemy script. So deriving just means that the specific enemy C# scripts will have access to all the variables and functions that the general enemy script will have. Alright, so in this video we're going to start creating the general script and we'll start filling it in. So the first thing we need to do is select our melee enemy, and I'm going to add a new C# script called enemy to it. Then once it's been created, I'll just double click on it to open it up inside of my text editor. Alright, so all we're going to do inside of this script in this video is code out the functionality for our enemy to take damage and die. So what we'll need is a public integer variable called health, and then we're going to create our own function. Alright, so to create our own function, I'm going to start off by writing the keyword void and follow it up with the name of my function. So I'll call it take damage. Then put a pair of parentheses and a pair of curly brackets. Now this function, we're going to make it public because we are going to be calling this function or running this function from another script. I'm just going to add the public keyword to it. And we're going to take in one parameter. It's going to be an int variable called damage amount. Alright, so basically when people will be calling this function, they'll be writing something like this. They'll be writing take damage and then passing in how much damage do they want to give to our enemy. So something like 5 will give 5 damage to our enemy. Alright, perfect. So now inside of this function, I'm just simply going to write health minus equals damage amount. So basically we're subtracting damage amount from our health variable. Once the damage has been applied, we're going to check if our health is less or equal to 0. In other words, if we are dead. And if we are dead, we're simply going to say destroy game object. There we go. Okay, that's all we have to do in this script. So now let's save it. Inside of Unity, I'm just going to give a health to my enemy. So I'll just say something like 3. The next step we have to do is to allow our projectiles to collide with our enemy and deal damage to him. Because if you now press the play button, you'll see that if we start shooting our enemy, the bullets just go right through him and don't do anything. So to fix that, the first thing we need to do is to add a box collider to our enemy to detect collisions between our projectile and our enemy. So I'm just going to add a box collider 2D and I'll press the edit collider button to shape it correctly. Once that's been done, we also have to add a rigid body 2D component to our enemy. So this is a very important thing to remember. When you want to detect collisions between two objects, the two objects need to have colliders and at least one of them needs to have a rigid body component. Otherwise the collisions will not work. So our projectiles don't have any rigid body component, which means that we have to add one to our enemy. So I'm going to come under here and say rigid body 2D. Alright, so just like for our player, we are going to set the gravity scale to 0 because we don't want him to be affected by any external forces, and we are going to freeze the rotation on the Z axis to avoid him turning around when he will get collided with. Lastly, I'm going to come up and give him a tag. So I'm going to go under tag, add tag, and create the enemy tag. Now select the enemy again and go under tag and choose the enemy tag that you just created. So we're giving the enemy a enemy tag so that in our scripts, when we will collide with an object, we will be able to check if the object we collided with had the tag of enemy, and if it did, then we know what we hit was our enemy and so we could deal damage to him. We're now going to go into our prefabs and select our projectile, and we're just going to make sure that we've got our box collider 2D also on our projectile and that is set to trigger. So the trigger just means that when this projectile will collide with an object, it won't move the object due to external forces. So it's just going to touch the object, detect the collisions, but it won't move it. Okay, so now let's just open up our projectile script. Inside the script, we need to detect collisions. The way we do that is very simple. We're just going to write void on trigger enter 2D and then pass in a parameter collider 2D collision. So this function here is a built-in Unity function, which means that it will get called automatically by Unity, and it also means that if you make a mistake in the name of this function, it will not work. So make sure that you wrote it exactly as I did right here. So this collider2D collision variable basically stores the object that we collided with. So that's very useful because now inside of this function, I'm going to check if the collision object dot tag is equal to enemy. So basically we're checking that the object that we collided with has the tag of enemy. If what we hit was an enemy, then I'm just going to call my take damage function on our enemy. So I'm just going to say collision.getComponent enemy to get our enemy script on our enemy object. And then I'll just call the take damage function that we created, and then we have to pass in a damage amount. So for that, I'm going to come at the top of my script and create a public int variable called damage, and I'll just pass in that damage variable inside of my function. Once we've dealt damage to our enemy, we're just going to destroy our projectile by calling the destroy projectile function that you created with my brother in the last video. Okay, so now let's save our script and test this out inside of Unity. Alright, so I'm just going to set the damage value to 1. And if we now press the play button, you'll see that we can start shooting our enemy, and if we shoot him 3 times, he'll destroy himself, and we successfully killed the bad guy. That was great work. I hope you enjoyed the video, and I'll see you in the next one very soon.